In this guide, we're going to open up a full activity. So before we looked at each element of an activity diagram and isolated it, but now what we're going to do is look at a diagram as a whole. And the example that we're going to walk through is a grading system. And so we're going to follow the data along at each stage and talk about it. We already kind of did this earlier for the element section, and so this is going to be a much shorter guide than the class diagram deep dive was. So the very first thing that I always look at with an activity diagram is the quiz. Now the quiz up there at the top, that is the name. So right away I know that this activity diagram has to do with the process of working through a quiz. Right below that is the next spot I look. If it is a complex activity diagram, then it's going to have swim lanes. Now you may also see, depending on how the UML designer did it, you may also see swim lanes that are horizontal. So do not let that throw you off. There is literally no change whatsoever. It simply is dependent on how the components all fit on the page and if it makes more sense to place it horizontally or vertically. In this sense, we went with vertically. The very first thing that we see in the swim lanes is that we have a teacher, a system, and a student. Now, before I even go down and follow the action flow and from the assigned test quiz all the way to store's result, the very first thing that I will do is I actually look at the roles and responsibilities of each one of the users. And when I mean user, I do not mean user as in an individual, because if you look in the middle, you can see that one of the swim lanes also represents the system. So I just look to see what does each swim lane have to do from a roles and responsibility standpoint. If I look all the way to the left, I see that a teacher simply assigns a test or a quiz, and then they do not have to do anything else until they approve the result. That is it. So that makes, when I look at one of these, that makes my job much easier in knowing what my teacher objects are going to have access to. Now the next part, when I look at the system, I see that the system's going to have to generate the individual question set, then it's going to have to ask a question, then it's going to assume the results, and then it's going to store that result. And that is going to make a little bit more sense when we actually follow the action flow. And then lastly, I look at the third swim lane, which is the student. The student's going to have to confirm, they're going to have to answer, and then the system itself, once it is going to get redirected to it, if it is last, it is going to allow them to finish. If not, then it's going to cycle back up again. So let's start at the very beginning. We are going to see that a teacher assigns a test in the quiz. From there, it's going to get redirected to the system. If you like sports analogies, you can think of action flows kind of like you're playing basketball, and with each action flow, you're passing the basketball to another player. And in this case, the teacher is passing the system to the system, and its job then is to generate an individual question set. From there, the system goes on and passes to the student. The student has the ability to confirm. So in other words, that would be like a student logging into the system and confirming that they want to start a quiz. From that point, the system is going to take over again. It's going to ask a question. From there, that gets passed to the student. The student answers. That goes down to a branch. Remember, the branches are where we can branch and have two different kinds of behavior. If the guards, which is yes and no, are there, then what's going to happen is we check what the branch is, where it says, was it last? If it was not the last question, it is going to get redirected to the system. It's going to ask another question, and it's just going to loop like that until that branch answer changes. So once we get to the point where it was the last question, it's going to switch to yes, and it's going to follow the other action flow. It's going to go down to assume the results, then it's going to get redirected to the teacher. They are going to approve it, and then lastly, it is going to have its endpoint there where it stores the result, and that is the full activity for a quiz in this system.